Hello, friends. YouTube Studio is giving me even less feedback than normal as to whether or not I'm here. Okay, there we go. Yeah, it looks like we're live. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Is it all happening? What's going on, guys? Happy Grade School Friday. Happy last grade school session of 2025. I cannot believe that's a thing. It's a little bit crazy. I'm glad to be spending this last grade school session with you guys. What's going on with y'all? What are you working on right now? I see we've already got some questions popping into the chat. Keep them coming. As always, this hour is for you guys. I'm here to help however I can. Excited to talk about some color stuff with you. My buddy Gadali is here with me. What's going on, G?
Oh, hey, just hanging out, end of the year. Good time to geek out about things without anyone else bothering me. It's great.
That's the. I feel like you and I have talked about this before. Maybe we've even talked about it on the show before. But like that is low key. Don't tell my family. One of my favorite things about the holiday season. I love spending time with my family and stuff, of course. But like, there's also like a really good window when we are working to do uninterrupted deep focus work because there's a lot less pulling on us from the outside world. So I'm with you there, buddy.
Yeah.
Let's see who's in the chat. What's going on? Oh, thank you. Thank you for the stash compliments, everybody. My lady's loving it. That's really the only vote that matters around here. But I'm happy with it. I'm glad the rest of us are happy with it too. It's all harmonious. I love it. Oh, Stefan's in the house. Amazing. Alchemic. D. Hartman's here. John's here. Okay, we got a party going on, guys. Thanks for being flexible with your schedules today. I had to shuffle some things around. But we're here now. We're partying. I'm, full disclosure, getting over some kind of bug. Definitely not feeling anywhere near 100%. But for bizarre reasons that I will share with you when we wrap our session today, I'm kind of pumped about that. It's kind of perfect for something we're going to talk about at the very end of today's session that if you guys have been here for previous last grade school sessions of the year, you've probably got a good sense of what we're going to be talking about. But anyway, I'm feeling under the weather, but I'm like psyched to be feeling under the weather for reasons that will become clear later. So that's enough about me. Let's get started. What do you guys got? What do you want to learn about Gadali? Where are we most hungry to increase our knowledge in the color grading world?
Ooh, I think we have a variety of most hungry topics. Uh, let's see. I have a few things about native tools. Shahid is wondering, how do you do skin compression with native tools in Resolve?
Skin compression with native tools and Resolve. Okay, this is one of these questions that, I mean, this is most grade school questions, but it's one of these ones that I feel like we could do a workshop on this right now. But like, let's keep it simple for now and just go with like, if we wanted to do skin compression natively within Resolve and take that idea at face value without me giving you any feedback on, like really what we're trying to do and the bigger picture there, I would go with the color compressor. Let's get some screen share going on here. And oh, I see. Give me one sec, guys. Let me set up my feed so that you can actually see me. Actually, we're not going to do that. You're going to be blind to my beautiful face while we're doing screen shares and Resolve. I hope you'll all get over this devastation in time. All right, so let's check out the color compressor here. This is what I would do, like, if I wanted to compress skin tones here within Resolve. And, like full disclosure, this is not something that I use all the time. So I'm not going to be like super slick as I go through it. But I'd do something like this. Pick a target color, a hue within your skin tone that feels like something you would like to move everything toward. And then essentially, you're going to compress hue into that region. Now you can see with the color compressor, it's pushing everything in that direction. So something you can try, if you wanted to, would be to flag this off to a range of hues. So if we do like something like this, just so that we've got a change happening visually in the image, we could now apply this, we could flag this operation off. So I'm going to go into my HSL keyer here, and I'm going to narrow my hues like so. I'm doing this with my control surface, but hopefully you can see stuff moving down here. I'm just like, this is usually how I pull keys for stuff. Like I pick whatever parameter I'm going to try to make like my most important one. And I'm going to narrow this width, and then I'm going to move my center. Again, I'm using my control surface, but you can see stuff moving. I'm just going to move the center so that it's grabbing kind of what I want to see it grab. And then again, just kind of like tune that width until it's somewhere that I want. then start to add some softness. And I've now got like a very broad, quite soft key that is focusing this in so that it's not trying to like when I look at the first version of what we were seeing there, I'm like, I don't really need like her shirt to get compressed to that color that I just picked out. You know what I'm saying? So like this can be a good way of kind of focusing that in, and you can see it in the vector scope here. If I go off and then on, you can see stuff around this area getting compressed in. Okay, so that would be one way of going about that if you just wanted to compress skin tones and you felt like that's what you needed to see. And if we like zoom in here and let's actually kind of see what we're getting here. What's funny is like we're seeing the change in the scope, and I can see it kind of in other stuff, like in this orange juice, I'm seeing it quite a bit, but it's actually not having that much of an effect on skin. That is like likely in this case because there's not a particularly wide range of skin tone happening here. And I do want to kind of like climb up to a higher level of this question for a second now. So I lied. I feel like for this, I want to feel slightly less crazy and feel like anyone is seeing me as I'm talking about this stuff excitedly into the camera. So let me see if I can crack this code for just a minute here. So if we do, I had to switch to my iPhone today, guys. That's why that's happening. I left my normal camera at the office. We did a podcast yesterday that I'm very excited for y'all to check out, but I had to switch to a different camera setup today, which is why it's misbehaving now. So let's do it like this. I'm just going to add, here's me, and we're just going to do this. We're going to do this literally live and with no fancy inset circle. Okay, something like that. You guys should now all be able to see me as I talk to you about some of the principles and theories that I think can be helpful as we're having this conversation about skin compression. So here's what I would say. When you're thinking about skin compression, there's skin compression that's already happening in like any imaging pipeline already. So the chances that you really need that, in my experience, are fairly low. Like I'm gonna give you some alternatives for what's actually often needed when we have that impulse to reach for skin compression. Because what can happen is like, you know, if I really juice this up, and especially if I'm not flagging it off like we did here before, we're just ending up like pushing everything into a single hue vector, which is like variation in hue when it comes to skin. Like that's not a bad thing at all. So like even like the idea of like what skin compression is and when we would want it, that's worth thinking about as well. But point being, like you can definitely go too far with this idea, and when you do, you can get unnatural and kind of like almost like strippy feeling results. Like strippy is in Technicolor, like 2-strip or 3-strip, right? So often here's what's needed when I feel like that impulse to reach for a color compressor or a skin tone compression scheme of some sort comes into play. Biggest one by far, for sure. Let's look at what we're doing right now in our tree. All right, so I'm gonna just in contour here, I'm gonna show this to you by turning something off. So right now I've got a pipeline just normally set up. I'm going through 2499 here, and I'm doing a look here in contour. Now let's leave this whole look turned on, and all I'm gonna do is turn off my split tone. Now, I don't particularly feel this way about this shot, about this subject, but can you see how when I turn off my split tone, it's a lot easier to diagnose and maybe feel like we need to do something about, oh, there's some redness or some blotchiness in the subject's face. As I said, like I don't particularly feel like that's a thing here, but I do feel like it's a piece of feedback that I could totally see getting from a client here, whereas I would not here. You guys picking up what I'm putting down? So like often it just comes down to like, often like the best thing you can do to get to scratch the itch that we call, oh, I want to compress skin tones, is actually just to put a little bit of a counterpoint in the low end so that skin tones aren't persisting as very red in the low end of the image. That just tends to be something that either we explicitly don't like or that we don't like as much as adding a little bit of coolness down into that area. That's like one quick example of something that I think can have a couple of different alternative solutions, but that's what I would encourage there is like play around with that color compressor if you want to, see how that feels, and then continue to experiment with like, okay, what if it wasn't really an issue of needing to have my hues more tightly clumped together with my this image? What if it was more to do with adding a touch of cool in the shadows? Or the other big one that I'll call out as we wrap up this question, would just be balance. Like a lot of the time, like this one does come to mind, or this one is a good example here. This is a good shot, good look, good pipeline, like well exposed. There's really not a lot of problem here, but I could totally see feeling like, oh, we need to tame or address our skin tones in some way. And in this case, the alternative for sure would be to just do some balance. Let me go to my primaries here so you can see this. Not my log wheels. We don't touch the log wheels around here. That's against the law. But look, I'm just moving my, let's move to my bullseyes here. So I'm just moving my linear gain southeast to like back off of that kind of like warm bias that I was feeling in the image. Like that solves it, the itch for me 100% in this image. So that's two alternatives to look at. Look at cooling off your shadows, or look at cooling off or balancing the image in general and seeing if that doesn't scratch the itch of feeling like you need to compress skin tones as well or better than actually using a skin tone compression scheme. Hope that helps.
Noir Grade is wondering, do you have any Python or Lua scripts installed to speed up your work? Are there any extra shortcuts or Stream Deck macros? What do you customize to be more efficient?
Oh yeah, cool question. Yeah, so I don't have any like Python or Lua stuff like live in the grading workflow right now. I do have my little Stream Deck here, and I'm trying to see like let me look at some of the stuff that might be a little less familiar. Oh, one of the ones that I love is like this cleanup node graph thing here. Weirdly, you have to, there's now a shortcut in Resolve for cleanup node graph. You guys can tell me if you've ever noticed this. Where is that? What's the shortcut for the keyboard customization? What's the shortcut for the keyboard shortcuts? If you look in here, I forget when this happened. It was fairly recently, if I'm remembering right. There's like a cleanup selected node graph option now that you can assign a keystroke to. Crazily, within Resolve, this will not work unless you have recently clicked within the node tree. So if I've like whatever, if I've tapped over here into my gallery or onto a new shot and I try to fire that command, what was that? Was that Shift Control C that I have it mapped to? Let's see here. Yeah, Shift Control C. So like, let's just try this out. Like if I go to a shot, you know, like let's load in my base tree here and then, you know, do something over here in the gallery. If I like tap to a different gallery page, maybe if I try Shift Control C, it doesn't actually work, like weirdly. So what you need to do in order to make it work is like what I do in my little keyboard Maestro shortcut is I add a serial node, I undo adding that serial node, and then I do the same shortcut, and then it works. So like that's an example of something that like I could do in 3 keystrokes within Resolve, but who wants to do that? So I do it within my Stream Deck. It just fires those commands: create new serial node, undo, and then clean up the node graph. And you can actually see it. Like if you watch close, you can actually see that node being created and then removed here on the node graph when I fire that keystroke. You might have been able to catch that. It's pretty fast, but that's one. I'm trying to think what else. Like I can just kind of briefly walk you through. Oh, you know what? This one. Let's see if it actually works. I feel like I'm always fussing with it because it's pretty hacky. Yeah, there we go. So mapping a node to linear. I love doing that. Like let's see if it works. That was my cleanup node graph. Let's map this node to linear. Did that work? Nah. Yeah, so I'm still messing with that one, but it's in theory pretty cool. And then like another one and I actually, no, never mind. I had another thing maybe we'll circle back to. I'll show you in this saturation node. Then the other one that I was going to show you guys is my node graph sections. This one I use all the time just to flip between clip level and like timeline level of the node graph. I don't use it to toggle between group pre-clip and group post-clip, which is what it does. Like a lot of these are things that are like I got used to having on my advanced panels at the office and that I need some way to kind of like mirror when I'm grading here at home. So that's another one that I use a lot just so I can easily tap over to the look level and be like, oh, let's turn off the look for a second and see what we were dealing with, you know, just with the 709 or whatever. So that's another big one. There's a couple others, but I'd say the rest of these are more about like preference for stuff that I want to have at like the ready, as opposed to like highly unusual or complex macros for doing stuff. Those are probably the most unusual ones in that respect. Hope that's fun. Let me know in the chat. What are you guys customizing and doing with your keyboard maestros or your Lua scripts or whatever other fanciness you guys are getting into?
I have one button on my Stream Deck that opens the Resolve manual, and I use that more than anything.
Oh wait, Kadali, is this one? I feel like this is like too good a secret, but I'm gonna put you on the spot and make you air it out. This is just general automation stuff. Isn't in Resolve, but will you tell us about your green lights? Do you still have your green lights?
I actually I haven't had those set up for a bit, but yeah. So I used to have a an automation set up. So I have these Philips Hue lights that can have automation. I have some automation on there. So Philips Hue lights, and then I used to have it set up to automate with I think a PayPal account, so that every time I got paid, my lights would flash green, and it would make me happy.
As well it should. That has made I've run on that, like whenever that, like remembering you telling me that pops into my head periodically. I've run on that for like, it's probably been years since you told me that story. So that's a and surprisingly I haven't implemented that automation in my life, but I feel like I should. So put that one high on the list, on your list, everybody. Forget the Stream Deck, forget everything else. Get some LED bulbs, automate them to blink green when you have money land in your bank account.
I
What
can't
else we
say that
got?
I have set those up, so I have like different presets on my Stream Deck just to change the lights, so I can go like into editing mode, and I want the lights a certain way, and versus colored mode, like if I want a darker room and stuff like that. So that is handy.
Oh yeah, and you know what? It's funny. I had that with my the lights that I had previously at both my office and here, and I love the lights I have now. But I haven't been able to figure out a way to hook them into the Stream Deck. So I used to have that, but no longer. That is a good one.
All right, got a question here. Cinemaniacs. I know your favorite subject is middle gray. My question is, in film, split tone happens higher than in digital, like at 58 or 60%. How can we make our split tone higher without exposure change?
How can you make your split tone higher without exposure change? Yeah, this is a cool question. So just because I can't help myself, I'll give you like a quick explanation on the film behavior that we're talking about. So here's what's interesting. Let's look at Genesis. Let's crash Resolve by trying to look at Genesis. That's what I get for having beta and experimental builds installed in parallel with the real one. I'm going to relaunch this real quick. But what I was going to drive at here is it's really important to recognize, like most of the time when it's very easy and tempting when we start talking about like, oh, what does film do, to just default to talking about what film prints do, which is valid, but it's not the complete story. So even that observation that like, oh, the split tone in film happens higher than mid gray, that really is only true when we are talking about the print side of things. If we look at both, we're going to see something slightly different. Let me get this going back on here. So if we turn on our curves, my crossover point, like within this system, and this is just a default setup with Genesis, running through like, normal Vision 3 neg stock, normal contemporary print stock, and my crossover point, it's right around where I would expect. Like, it's not necessarily higher. But you are right that, like, check this out. If I neutralize my neg curves, this is a control within Genesis, by the way. Oh, actually, so this is interesting. It's actually maintaining that pivot pretty well. So I think, like, maybe the even better way to frame this conversation, again, about, like, the ground observation of, like, oh, what film does, is that there's a lot of variables. There's the variables of, like, well, how does the neg interact with the print? There's the variable, like, this is something that my guest, by the way, on the podcast was none other than Dr. Mitch Bogdanowicz. Very excited to share that conversation with you guys. We got to talk about a bunch of stuff that we have never talked about anywhere else in our I guess I haven't done that many interviews with Dr. Bogdanowicz, but we've done lots of classes. Give me put a hand up if you've joined for any of the classes that I've done with Dr. Bogdanowicz, and like me, have just tried desperately to like hang on to the ride and grasp like every 10th idea or so as it flies by. But regardless, we got to cover some stuff that we've never talked about before in any other class or any other conversation that we had. I think you guys are going to really like it. One of the things that we ended up talking about is something that Dr. Bogdanowicz taught me a lot about during the development of Genesis, which is the calibration of film printers. Ever thought about that or wondered about that? I didn't even know it was a thing until we got to a certain point in development with Genesis, and I needed to know it was a thing because even though we're working in the box, we had to calibrate the printer that the print is actually, like being produced by here within Genesis. So all of these things, like the neg stock that you use, the way that the neg was developed, any specialty processing that was used therein, the underlying calibration of the printer that the color timer may or may not even be aware of, all of these things are going to affect where that split tone happens. So it's just worth saying, this is all my very long way of saying that the crossover point for a film split is higher than in a digital system or higher than at, a stock middle gray is not necessarily true. It can be true, but it's not inherently true. Now, let's go to the actual question. Like, okay, how can we move up our film crossover point or our split tone crossover point rather when we are grading digitally? So here's a really easy workflow for this. I have contour here. With contour, it's super easy. Like I can literally just explicitly define my pivot point. So if I pull up this curve, and I'm just going to go bonkers strong with this split, so it's really easy for you to see what I'm doing. You can see that's explicitly in stops moving where that pivot point is. So that's cool. And if you're a contour user, give me a shout in the chat. But if not, you do not need contour to achieve this behavior. You just need to have a good process in place. Let's put this split back to something sensible. Okay, so check this out. Normally, if I wanted to build a split tone natively within Resolve, oh look, I've already got DaVinci Wide Gamut Gray in line here. This is my exposure chart DCTL, free download in the description for today's video, all that good jazz. If you don't already have this, go grab it. It's something that'll definitely be useful to you at some point. But all I do is set my total steps to 1 and turn this show ramp option off. So now I've got this pure patch of middle gray in DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, right? And so what I would do normally if I wanted to create any kind of custom curve, including a split tone where I'm anchored around middle gray, is I would create this patch and then I would eyedropper in a new serial node on that gray patch. So I've now got this anchor right at middle gray, right? But in this case, we want to move it higher. So we've got a couple of options. Like the first option would be to be like, yeah, okay, like this is normal. Let me just move it up a little bit. All I'm doing is holding Option and dragging this to the right and just kind of going by eye. And I could do this here at the beginning. I could do this after I've built the split. It's a little bit harder then, but I could just do it sort of visually that way. But I could also go back over here to my exposure chart and I could do a couple things. If I wanted to move my steps up, probably the easiest way to do this, I'm like, okay, I want to cross over at 1 stop over mid-gray. Well, if I do my steps to 3, what do I have now here? This is good background for anyone who isn't already aware, who might be curious with this exposure chart DCTL. Mid-gray is always in the middle, no matter how many steps you set up, right? So right now I've got 3, so mid-gray middle, 1 over to the right, 1 under to the left. So if I want to pivot around 1 over, when I set up this custom curve over here, instead of doing my eyedropper on the normal mid-gray, I would just do it here. And now my crossover point is going to be at 1 stop over. And at this point, I could build a split scheme like I normally would, which would be something along these lines, where in the bottom, I'm just going to take some red out. It kind of connects up to our conversation earlier about finessing skin tone or skin tone compression and alternatives to skin tone compression. So I'm going to move this. Give me back my red channel, please. There we go. So I'm just going to drop my reds. What's that going to do? That's going to leave behind green and blue, which is cyan. That's often like the general hue area that I like to push into my shadows. And then in the top end, I would do some red and some green up. Something like that, okay? And I've just set this up like with whatever push I've decided I want to do in the bottom and in the top. My crossover point is now 1 stop higher than it was before. Now, to me, the tricky thing, like, not even tricky, it's just time consuming thing that comes in here is like, let's say I've got this set up and I'm like, this is cool, but like maybe I only want to be a half stop over. That's where it just takes a little bit of manual effort to say, okay, I'm going to move this crossover point. Like let's say we actually want to do that. I'm now going to say total steps 3. Let's do a step increment of 0.5. That means that this is a half stop over mid-gray instead of a full stop over. And if I go back over here, I can eyedropper to figure out where this is resting. Let's go like so. Let's see. Sometimes it gets, these custom curves can get finicky about actually dropping a control point. If we were to do this on a new one, it'll drop it on no problem. So I can, as a rough idea, I can just hold Option and drag the crossover points for my green, my red, and my blue channels down to that new spot. Takes just a little bit of extra keystroke or mouse click to make it happen, but that would be how I would kind of continue to finesse that after I'd got it started. So hopefully that gives you kind of a good overall process for parking and manipulating the position of your crossover point when you're building a split scheme, whether that's natively within Resolve or with whatever other tool you want. I mean, natively within Resolve is going to be the main application for this, but that's the premise of it, is you really want to define, okay, instead of mid-gray, let's produce a patch that tells me where to drive my crossover if I want to be whatever it is, half stop over, one stop over, half stop under, whatever you want to do. Hope that helps.
All right. Got one here about matrices. Could you explain the reasons why you might use, for example, a 3x9 matrix or a polynomial matrix instead of just a normal linear 3x3?
Yeah, for sure. So let's see if I have a matrix here in this project right now, or in my DCTL folder, I should say. So here's what's fun. I mean, you guys game to, oh, look, we got some 3x9 matrices. You guys game to geek out and get kind of color sciencey for a minute? Buckle in, hang on. I'll do my best to explain this in a relatively straightforward way. So normally we talk about 3x3 matrices, right? To talk about a 3x3 matrix, we don't even need to leave Resolve. We can just go into our RGB mixer, and this RGB mixer is a 3x3 matrix. A 3x3 matrix is an operation in which you define how much input red, input green, and input blue are going to go into my output red. Okay, that's the easiest baseline way to think about this stuff, is just take it one channel at a time. All that a 3x3 matrix is doing for each channel is exactly what I just described. It says, hey, I'm about to produce an output red, an output green, and an output blue. And within each of those channels will be a mixture of my input, red, green, and blue. That's why we call it a 3x3, because within each of those 3 outputs, we have 3 inputs that are being mixed around. And you can see that being laid out visually here on the RGB mixer. So my red output right now is all red, no green, no blue. So what does that mean? No change from input to output, right? Same thing with my green, 0 green, all green, or 0 green, or rather 0 red, all green, no blue. And then with my blue, no red, no green, all blue, right? So that's the basic logic, just as kind of a recap into the baseline of a 3x3 matrix. Now, what's interesting here is these are gain operations. These are just multiplications that are happening, right? So these are by definition linear operations, where we can effectively, if we think about it in a geometric way, we can move an RGB cube around and we can distort it, but only in a linear way. We can skew it or we can rotate it, essentially. Why we might want to use a 3x9 matrix or any other matrix in like the broadest description that I could think to give you would be to do nonlinear stuff, essentially. And we can take a look right now at what nonlinear stuff would be. But before we even get into that, where things get interesting with a 3x9 matrix is like, all right, let's think about what is a 3x9 matrix. We know what a 3x3 is now. Now let's actually even make it simpler. I recognize that whomever is asking this question, I'm probably recapping things for right now, but I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to climb this ladder from 3x3 to 3x(n) matrices. So we'll get to your question here shortly. So let's just look at a 3x6 matrix for a second here, okay? So what's interesting is a 3x6 matrix, no matter what the dimensions of our matrix, one thing is always going to be true in a normal imaging system, right? There's going to be 3 output channels. Like ultimately, all we can do is produce a red, a green, and a blue channel, right? Like unless we're working with like a next generation multi-primary display, like a company I actually consulted for a time called 6P Color, where they actually were designing displays that had diodes that emitted at different wavelengths than a normal red, green, and blue. But that's like very much an edge case and a future technology and innovation that is in positively no one's home right now. Closest you can get right now is like there are some production lights that actually have more than 3 emitters in order to create to better create different colors that you might want to create when you're shooting. But for displays, for our application for color grading, red, green, and blue output is the thing that we are constrained by, right? So that's one helpful thing to keep in mind when we're talking about 3x6 or 3x7 or 3x, you might have seen I've got a 3x18 matrix in here. It's a little bit easier to think of when you realize that the 3 is always going to have to be a 3, because all we can really produce at the end of the day is red, green, and blue. Okay, so what's changing in a 3x6 matrix versus a 3x3 matrix, for example? What's changing is I now have 6 terms that I can mix around for each output. So now my output red, which you can see here, is my first 6 sliders. My output red is not only made up of input red, input green, and input blue, but it's made up in this case of input cyan, input magenta, and input yellow. Now, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time talking about what that means right here, because what's interesting is because we're talking about this ground truth of red, green, and blue, anything more than 3, any matrix with more than 3 terms to it, those terms can be whatever you want. They're synthetic terms. So like in this case, cyan, magenta, and yellow, those are just the inverses of red, green, and blue. That's just cyan is equal to 1 minus red. Magenta is equal to 1 minus green, and so on. But these can be whatever I want them to be. Like there's no such thing as there's no single correct definition of a 3x6 matrix. It's whatever terms you want to calculate and say, okay, now that they've been calculated, you can mix these into your outputs in whatever way you want them to be. Okay. If you're tracking with me, big picture, concept wise, great job. This is kind of heavy stuff. So that would be a 3x6 matrix. This type of matrix is not one that I often use, not specifically the 6 terms, but having these linear inverses of like cyan, magenta, and yellow. That's not one that I reach for a ton, because ultimately it's still linear. It's just got a bit more degree of freedom than you have with a 3x3. But going back to the original question, one that I do use all the time, or like maybe all the time is a strong term, but like I've used a lot and you can do really interesting things with, is a 3x9. So my input terms, and another like great hack if you're at all curious to start thinking about higher order matrices, or the like polynomial matrices, I think was the phrase used in the question. What you want to do is find ways to simplify it for yourself, because if you just try to like bite off what I'm working with here, it's just too many sliders and too many terms. It's very overwhelming, right? But if you start to recognize like, okay, all I'm doing is repeating one pattern 3 times, because I've got to have a red output, a green output, and a blue output, right? And within here, these are all things that are happening after my input red, green, and blue. Those are always going to be things that I'm mixing into any size matrix. So really, this may look like 27 sliders that you have to understand, but really all it is 6. Because the first 3, all you need to do is understand red, because if you understand anything with the word red in front of it, you understand the pattern as it repeats with green and blue, okay? And you don't really need to worry about these, because you already get these if you've worked with the normal 3x3 matrix. So if we focus that in, that just means we need to understand these things. So this is red R times R, red G times G, red B times B, red R times G, red R times B, and red G times B. What in the world does all of that mean? It's actually pretty simple. The input terms here, instead of the input term being just take the starting red value and run it through the matrix, in this situation, you multiply that number by itself, you square it, and then you manipulate that. So like if we get practical with this here for a second, I got so excited I didn't even remember what shot that was that I was just on. Let's grab that 3x9 matrix. Yeah, actually this will be a good shot to work on it. I'm going to get a fresh instance here, and let's actually see what this 3x9 matrix can do. So if you take a look at this red squared here, you can do interesting things, because it means that you are only going to affect very strong inputs of red. Because like, let's think for a second about like everything's in 0 to 1. So if I have a red value that's coming in at say 0.1, and then I multiply it by itself, so that would be zero point 0.1 times 0.1, what's going to happen? It's going to get a lot weaker, right? It gets a lot smaller. So this is a way of manipulating. This is going to have much stronger effect on stronger reds and much less effect on weaker reds, okay? So that would be like, again, I'm just kind of trying to orient us to what the possibilities can be within this system. Let's go back to my previous matrix here. I mean, actually, either of these are fine. And then another like helpful tip here, if you think about what we call row sums. So like, again, a row, like my red row, my output red. If I want to maintain my neutrals, meaning not move my neutrals and only change my colors, I just need to make sure that all of these values add up to 1. Anything with the word red in front of it adds up to 1. Right now, things are adding up to 1.364, right? So if I wanted to change that, I could do, let's just make this an even happier number. Let's say 0.25 red and red, 0.75 red. Am I getting that right? Maybe not. Maybe my matrix game is slipping. Oh yeah, actually I am getting that. I'm going to modify or complicate this a little bit and say that what we need is we need to have a sum of 0 for this higher order area. So that would need to be like 0.25 here and negative 0.25 there, for example. So you can see I'm getting that change in the image. So that's like, you kind of need to treat these top 6 that I was just talking about as their own thing that need to sum to 0 instead of summing to 1 when you're combining the first 3 red, green, and blues. Okay. So with that baseline, with that context in place, like how would I actually use this? Like one way that you can use it is like, if we look at, what we're doing here, I could do like, let's just try something here. Let's try negative 0.3 for my red in red and 0.3 for my green times green, or for my red squared. Negative 0.3 for my red squared, 0.3 for my green squared. Okay. Well, what's that doing? That's adding some weight to my reds, right? Now, here's kind of the trade-offs here. 3x9 matrices, I've worked with these a lot, and I've actually built several tools that like were made in an attempt to make these a little more intuitive to me. Because like, if this feels fairly counterintuitive and tricky to you, you're not alone. That's how it feels to me too. The upside here is if you can achieve what you're trying to achieve, like if your goal was to get more weight into your reds, like I'm seeing right now, if you can achieve it using this matrix, it's going to be super, super clean. This is a very gentle operation. And I know we're taking a minute on this one, but let's just do, it wouldn't be a year of grade schools if we didn't make it over to Fusion at least one more time. Let's just visualize what's happening here again so that this is beneficial for all of us. So I just want you guys to see the difference of a 3x9 versus a 3x3. So with this 3x9, I'm just going to visualize a cube here in Fusion. And we could now look at, like with my red squared, that is going to have a different type of effect on, see how things are bending when I move these things around? If I were only doing the bottom 3 terms, I would never be able to get that kind of bend in the image. It's just going to move things in straight lines. Like it will slant, it will skew, but it will not curve. You follow what I'm saying? Like it's always going to skew or rotate things, but it can't curve things the way that I can when I work like my green times blue, for example. So that's a visual on kind of what I was describing before, and sort of a general like idea for further exploring things here is that you can, even though it's not necessarily the most intuitive, at least for me, you can affect really clean changes because these are still very broad things, even though they are more focused and less linear than what you could do with a traditional 3x3 matrix. Full credit, by the way, to Dr. Bogdanowicz for teaching me literally everything that I just shared with you guys. So hopefully I explained it half as well as he taught it to me. Hope that helps.
Right. How would you try to emulate the path to white characteristic that 2499 or other DRTs have with the native DaVinci Resolve tools?
Ooh, I feel like this might have come up recently in another session. I'll give you the short answer there. I wouldn't like the path to white thing. And again, like I want to make this intelligible for all of us, even if you weren't the one who asked the question and don't know what it means. Let's look at Thatcher's RGB chips DCTL here. You can see if we compare 2499 versus Resolve Color Management, this patch of exposures of, these are just ascending exposures of varying hues of, like red and then looping all the way through the color wheel back around to red. You can see as we go through one DRT versus the other, what happens to saturation. And that like saturation is not necessarily dying or diminishing as we climb in exposure here compared to 2499, where it very much is. That's what we mean when we talk about a path to white. So what can we do to emulate that with Resolve native tools with like a Resolve CST? I wouldn't try, simply because path to white is one of many complex characteristics of a DRT that make it suitable, that make it robust, that make it error-proof or artifact-proof, or at least make it less likely to have errors or artifacts or visual problems. So it's not as simple as saying like, oh, I just want to get that characteristic. That's my first answer. I wouldn't try. If I wanted to, it's not that easy. It kind of comes, it's like similar to our skin tone compression question. Mechanically, it's not terribly difficult to do. Like if I prepend a serial node and I go to my loom versus sat over here and say, I want to kill saturation as we climb in luminance, there we go. It's done, right? Like it's actually interesting that, let me turn off my contour and see if that's having an effect. Yeah, like it's interesting that it's kind of hanging on here. Like you might need to play around with, even after doing that, some different options here. Or it might be a matter of like, I might need to drop that sooner. So like, let's do this. Or the real bulletproof way, because what I'm looking at right now is I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's still kind of hanging on in some of that magenta area. The real bulletproof way, if you just want to like make the DRT behave, would be to do something like this, where you are just dropping that saturation as you climb in luminance, right? Now, it may, like, to be honest, it's surprising to me. My intuition was to expect this would really bleach out as we climb over here on the right. But I suppose that's because these things don't have as much exposure or luminance by Resolve's calculation in them as we do in these other areas. But this would be like the easy way to start looking at, hey, as I'm climbing and reaching a certain like exposure threshold, I want there to be a path to white. But I don't think that's really going to solve, it's not necessarily going to make for a better DRT. So my question back to you would be like, why not just use a DRT that gives you the path to white behavior that you like, and a bunch of other behaviors that you're going to find advantageous. In general, you should be able to tune things, whether it's with 2499 or with OpenDRT would be the other like third-party DRT that I would recommend for this type of stuff. You should have all the control that you need to get only the things that you want, but to get those things that you want in like their best expression from those DRTs, as opposed to trying to get a Resolve CST or a Resolve DRT to do a better job than it's really capable of doing. Hope that helps.
All right. Frank is wondering if they've got a split tone, either a custom curve or DCTL, where does it go in the pipeline?
Oh, great question. Great question. So like a split tone or a custom curve, DCTL, like something that is, I'm going to assume like the question is fundamentally like, if you have some type of tool or operation that's doing that job of tinting shadows and highlights in a direction that you like, where should that live within your imaging pipeline? The short answer, like the smart aleck answer would be wherever you want, right? But it kind of like comes back to conceptually what you are after. So for me, I'll tell you how it works. Let's wipe out. Let's do a parallel stack actually. So we're going to do, or a layer mixer, I should say. We're just going to do Genesis in this lower layer here. If I look at Genesis, this is where like my sort of palette and desire for split tone typically comes from, is like I want to have a split scheme like I'm seeing in the net curve of my film system right here. Doesn't mean that I'm trying to reproduce it one-to-one, but that's kind of where the general inspiration or idea comes from, right? So if we say that's what I want to do, this is hitting at the end of the system, right? And if we think about, okay, like here's a better way to put it, or a way to sort of like add on to my first smart aleck answer of like wherever you want. Well, what impact is it going to have when you place your split tone at different places? Well, when you put your split tone here, there's going to be a couple of things. That means that this split tone is going to hit every image the same way, regardless of the local corrections or grades that you perform on that image. Like if we think about this, let's put an instance of contour on like, let's try it this way. Can we find some kind of parallel? Actually, this is probably perfect right here. Let's look at this image. I'm going to turn this curve off now in Genesis. And let's just say that I am going to grade these two images differently. Okay, so one, maybe I need to expose it up more. One, maybe I end up balancing a little bit warmer than the other. The image is going to have a different net split tone when I do that, if I do it before those grading operations. Okay, so like, let's reset everything here and just do a split scheme. And let's make this, I'm going to make this objective. We're just going to look at a ramp for a second here. So like, and we can turn everything else off. So here in my waveform, you can see the waveform is matching what I would see in contour if I show my split curve. And by the way, I'm using contour for this because it's easy to do it with, but this, like everything we're talking about will travel one-to-one with a split scheme that you build in your custom curves or some other DCTL. Doesn't matter. It's just the convenient tool for me. So let's do this. Like if I've got my curve set up like so, you can see it's tracking one-to-one in the waveform with what I intended, with what I prescribed, what I asked for in contour. But if this is happening before I start grading stuff, well, watch what happens. That net split scheme is going to change, right? Because it's being applied after. So what you end up doing is you end up dragging your split scheme through your shot level corrections in a way that I don't think would typically be desirable. Typically, you want your split scheme to be uniform and you want it to consistently hit your image and kiss your image at the very end of the process. That's part of, to me, what the benefit of a split scheme is it's wrapping all of your image in this same treatment that says, hey, at, arbitrary example, but at mid-gray on down, we're going to push this particular color of teal into that area of the image in a very consistent way. And in the top end, we're going to treat it like so. And that's never going to change. That's just how it's going to be for every shot in this project. It's part of the glue that holds things together. If you're moving this upstream, then you're going to not get that same consistency. It's kind of similar to like the question of like, well, where should I put my grain? Well, if you strictly speaking want to emulate negative grain, then you might want to put your grain at the head of your node graph. But what's going to happen then? That means that shots that you need to expose up or do big color balance swings on, their grain is going to look different because that grain is being corrected along with the shot. And that actually is the way that it works with neg. Like if I'm timing neg and I like print it way up, it's going to have a different, like the grain is going to be more prominent. That's usually this kind of constraint of when you are timing something like, oh, I really want it to be brighter. Well, there's only so far you can go before the grain becomes too distracting to be effective anymore, right? So if you're emulating neg grain, that would be the way to do it, but then you're going to have variability in the final grain in your image. So kind of the same thing here. If you want that variability, if you want this to be a characteristic of the captured negative and you want to correct it and have that characteristic be modified by that correction, then you would put it upstream. Otherwise, I think it works best like in 99 out of 100 cases to have it be the very last thing that touches your image, because it's consistent and it does its job of kind of tying everything together and making it feel uniform.
All right. What makes a good bleach bypass? And what is the difference between methods like soft light overlay desaturation versus a real chemical bleach bypass?
Yeah, great question. And there's different ways to kind of try to peer into that and arrive at some good conclusions. We're actually going to be doing a deep dive video on bleach bypass in the near future, so it's a timely question, but happy to start chopping it up a little bit here. Let's clean up this node graph a little bit, and we can get rid of Genesis for now. So let's think about bleach bypass in two different ways. There's like bleach bypass, any bleach bypass look that you do is going to be somewhere on a spectrum, okay? And I'm talking about a spectrum of like what's being modeled. On one far end of the spectrum, it could be as simple as contrast up, saturation down, right? Like we could do increase contrast, decrease saturation. And like this is, like probably if I blind taste tested this room, and let's, try to set our pivot to kind of where it belongs. Like if I were to ask everyone in this room, like before this question came up, what kind of look would you say this is right here? I think probably most of us would say, oh, it's kind of a skip bleach thing, right? So like it can be as simple as saying, oh, I just want an image with some very strong contrast and very low saturation. That would be one way to look at it. The other far end of that spectrum, so that's like one goalpost, one end of the spectrum. The other far end of it would be like, I actually want to chemically model what would happen if I were to perform that operation in a laboratory. And I'm talking more about like, intent and approach right now than like end aesthetics, which we'll get to in a minute. But if we look at like, obviously that's what's happening in Genesis, so much so that we can choose to apply a skip bleach to our negative or to our print. But what's interesting is, like when I blindly do that versus when I actually follow the method and model of doing it the laboratory way, I get different results, right? Like I could not have more hastily spun up that look just now, so it's not surprising that I didn't somehow magically align it with Genesis. But like it's a very different feeling type of skip bleach. And a couple things that I'll call out here that I noticed when we got the bleach bypass model up and running with Genesis that were like challenging to my idea or like expanded my idea of what bleach bypass really meant. It's like if you look at, in Genesis here, we actually describe it like in the tooltip here, but we essentially like with your negative bleach bypass, you're going to desaturate your secondaries, your cyan, magenta, and your yellow faster than your primaries, your red, green, and your blue. And you can kind of see that here. Like it's crazy how bleachy this feels, but there's a lot more color going on here than there is here, right? And just, as a experiment, let's like kind of try to match it. Like if I take this to 25, is that going to be closer? Maybe like, and there's, I will like say there's other things I could be doing to try to align these two. That's not really my goal right now. More what I want to point out is that when I just am using the 2 degrees that we started with, like, contrast and saturation, when I increase contrast and decrease sat here, by the time I get the sat where it needs to be, it's either not like it doesn't quite feel skip bleachy yet, like which is kind of what argue I'm seeing here, or if I take it to where I had it, which I'm like, okay, this really does feel more like a skip bleach thing, maybe somewhere in between those, there's actually less richness than like with the true photochemical approach to things. One of the reasons for that, maybe the biggest, easiest one to call out, is that there's that like differing rate of desaturation between primaries and secondaries. And you can also see here too, like let's just, for fun, look at, let me make this into do this here, and then we're going to do a print bleach bypass now, which is going to have the opposite. It's now going to desaturate red, green, and blue faster than cyan, magenta, and yellow. And it's going to have a different effect on contrast as well. So like these are different approaches, and if we compare this to our kind of naive resolve approach, it's actually closer. What we just did up here is closer, for whatever that's worth, to a print bleach bypass than to a negative bleach bypass. Okay, so like all that is to say, this is the spectrum that we are all playing on when we say we want to do a bleach bypass in terms of how we're going to implement that. On one side is like, look, I need more contrast. I need less saturation. I don't really care what it's modeled on. I don't really care about all of the many nuances that I could get into there. I just want it to be high contrast and low saturation. And that's not crazy, because the thing is, even though to my eye and probably to a lot of you guys, like these feel very different. Like they have very different character and like aesthetic quality to me. In like really broad strokes, they're both very high contrast, low saturation looks, right? So like it's not crazy to take that more kind of like fundamental ground level approach to a bleach bypass. But where it gets interesting is if we start looking at like, okay, what are the things that we're seeing here? If you're like me and you really like what you're seeing here, what are some of the things that we're seeing here that we can get closer to here in Resolve? There's a bunch, but I'm going to point out like just the first couple that kind of come to mind for me. Let's go ahead and plot things on our grayscale ramp right now. The first thing that becomes really important is the way that we're handling. Let me do this so it stays active. So something that I'm getting right now is like when you start looking at doing high contrast looks, you really want to be mindful that it's nice, gentle, rolling contrast, which it actually is. My contrast here is decent because here in my project settings, general options, I've got use S-curve for contrast turned on. Now, if I was using lift gamma gain to do this, for example, or if I had this turned off, what would I get? Well, in simplest terms, I'd still be getting that strong contrast, but I'm going to start to get really, really like hot or clippy things in the top and in the bottom of the image. So the first upgrade that we can make here is just to make sure that we're introducing a nice rolling contrast. Even though it's going to be very steep in the middle of the curve, like very strong, we want to make sure it's rolling off and not feeling like harsh or clippy in the bottom and in the top of the image. That's one easy thing that we can do right off the bat. And the next thing that we can do that I'm not going to dive into much right now, but you can start playing around with like, now that we understand this kind of top level tidbit that like, oh, neg bleach bypass desaturates cyan, magenta, yellow faster, print bleach bypass desaturates red, green, and blue faster. Start thinking about like, okay, which one do you want to do? And actually mimic that behavior. So instead of just doing a simple global saturation thing, you could look at, you know, going into your hue versus sats and saying, okay, I'm going to go for the neg thing. So I'm going to take my yellows and I'm going to take my cyans and my magentas, and I'm going to desaturate those faster than everything else. Like so. And so now I've got this, I'm starting to model that difference in rate of desaturation between the primaries and the secondaries. And you could do the opposite. If you wanted to model a print bleach bypass, you would desaturate red, green, and blue and allow your cyan, magenta, yellow to persist. And you can still marry this with your saturation knob. It's just that you'll be getting a different ratio of response because you are changing that ratio right here within the same node. So that's a bunch of different ideas on bleach bypass for you. It's a big topic. Like I said, we've got a full video coming out on it where we're going to dive deeper than I have in the last couple minutes here, but glad it came up. Really cool question and really cool topic to explore. And like, I love a good bleach bypass when it's done really well. And when it is done really well, to me, to my eye, it really is a matter of finessing all of the variables that we've started touching on here in the last few minutes and going further than like, oh, slam the contrast, pull the saturation and ship it. So good appetizer course for talking more deeply about bleach bypass. All right, my friends, that went fast. Well, it's end of 2025. Okay. Well, we're done with color grading for today. So if you have gotten your fill on the color grading side, then you can feel free to wrap here. I've got something I always love to share as we are wrapping out a year of grade school and a year in my color grading adventures and of hanging out with you guys here on YouTube. So I'm going to share a story with you guys about my own journey in my personal life. Okay. So like, I'm just going to start with an observation for you that here in the US and all over the world, you know, like the end of the year is coming up, New Year's Eve is coming up, and we like to celebrate the gift of a new year by taking out the most risky, most expensive debt that we possibly can against that year on the very night before we're gifted that new year. I'm talking about the consumption of alcohol and other substances. And the reason I can say that is because I've spent most of my adult life taking out that debt every single New Year's Eve and throughout the rest of the year. It's not like I'm a good boy. I was a good boy the rest of the year, and then I just was partying on New Year's Eve. I've taken out that debt throughout the year. And when I say debt, what I mean is, you can tell me if this resonates with you or any of your experience, but like every one of those New Year's Eves that I chose to like overindulge in, and in my case, abuse alcohol, I woke up with the distinct feeling of being in debt. I was physically and spiritually in debt because of what I'd done to my body and my brain the night before. So the reason I share this with you guys is because there's so much cultural pressure literally all over the world to not only indulge in, but overindulge in alcohol, specifically on New Year's Eve. And if you look statistically at like there's like over 1 million people die if we like all the many negative effects of alcohol, guys. There's lots of them, but just look at traffic fatalities alone. 1 million plus people all over the world die in traffic accidents every single year. And it's estimated that as many as 35% of those are alcohol related. Okay. So if you like drill even further into that, the proportion of those that hit in this time of year is crazy. It's like a huge proportion of alcohol related fatalities happen at this time of year. So it has real impact and has life-changing, life-ending impact for some people. I recognize that's not for everybody, but those are the table stakes, okay? Those are the type of table stakes that make many of us abstain from like, no, I'm probably not going to drive around without a seatbelt all the time. I'm probably not going to pick up a heroin habit, because while I recognize it's possible to drive without a seatbelt and live, and it's possible to inject heroin and not succumb to addiction and like have all these adverse health outcomes, it's not a very winning bet, right? So my point with all this is that we have this immense cultural pressure, especially around the holidays, to indulge and overindulge in alcohol. And the same people who encourage us, the same culture and peer groups and pressures that encourage us to do there, for me, I realized at a certain point in my journey, were not there when I was having to pay off that debt, when I was having to wake up hungover, when I was having to live with the decisions that I'd made on a New Year's Eve or any other night of the year. So this is all my simple way of saying to you, if you, like me, have gotten to a point where you don't feel good about that pressure, or you feel like you are doing these things because there just is this sort of like default pressure or like drift that pulls you in that direction, I want to lend you some of my courage to say, like, you don't have to do that. You can do whatever you want. And I shared with you guys at the beginning of this session, I'm feeling like way less than 100% today. I'm like getting over a little bit of a bug. The reason I'm so stoked about that is because it allows me to share something really powerful with you. I feel right now, this is like barring like, I think I might get really, really sick like every 5 or 6 years or something. Barring getting really, really sick, this is about as bad as I get. Like I'm really under the weather right now. I feel so much better today than I ever felt when I was regularly abusing drugs and alcohol. So my point is that like when you decide to make that change, if you have the courage and the clarity to say, hey, I know this is what I'm being pressured to or what feels like is the default, but I am going to choose to do something different. When you take that first step, I promise you, you will be surprised at the impact that it has, and you will be surprised at just how good better can be, just how much better you can feel when you make that decision. So we like to talk about color grading here on the channel. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. I'm not your coach. I'm not your parent telling you what you should or should not do. But what I am here to do is encourage you that if you have this inkling that, hey, maybe this isn't for me, maybe this is something that I'm just being kind of pressured or defaulted into that is no longer serving me, I want to equip you with my courage and my encouragement to say, hell yeah, do it. I promise it works. You are onto something by making the decision to either temper or to fully abstain from the consumption of drugs and alcohol. Whether it's on New Year's Eve or the rest of the year, it's had an incredible impact on my life. I'm the guy I am today, standing in front of you guys, getting to do what I love, getting to share what I love, getting to do it with people I love and feel affinity with because of that choice. Like, it's not an exaggeration. I would not be standing here with you today if I hadn't made that little decision and had that little bit of courage in my own life to say like, hey, I know this isn't serving me anymore and I'm going to start doing something different. I wouldn't get to be here with you guys today without that decision. So that's the other thing that I always like to share in this conversation that I try to have at the end of every year in grade school is just how grateful I am for that. I'm so, so grateful to be standing here with you guys and to be sharing what I love most with you guys and to feel connected with this global community of color ninjas. So that's where I'm going to end it and just say thank you guys for, like really giving me the community and the connection that I looked for like a long chunk of my adult life. It's a privilege to be a member of this community and get to share what I love most with you guys. And go enjoy your holidays. Go have great holidays. And if you are like me and you're ready to maybe do something different, maybe think about things differently than those around you are thinking about them, borrow my courage, take my encouragement, and go do that. And I am cheering you on. I'm your biggest fan in that. And I hope you have a safe and wonderful holiday season. Thank you guys. Thanks for an awesome 2025. Cannot wait for all the cool stuff we're going to do in 2026. Have a great holiday.